Chapter 1: The Night of Exile and Slander. The spring night storm poured freezing rain down upon the muddy streets of Mayfair, casting a grey shroud of mist over the luxurious aristocratic mansions of the London season. The relentless patter of rain against the stone arches and the wind howling through the window frames created a bleak, mournful atmosphere. Evelyn Thorne stood shivering beneath the grey stone portico of the Royal Navy Administration Building, her slender hands, reddened by the biting cold, clutching a small oak casket, the sole possession remaining to her after her father's tragic and unjust demise during a tempestuous voyage. Her father, a brilliant and dedicated royal cartographer, had been falsely accused by none other than her own uncle, Lord Edward Thorne, of selling the fleet's secret patrol charts to the French enemy, a ruthless slander calculated to usurp the family's entire map-making business in London. This cruel accusation had utterly stripped the Thorne name of its honor, reducing Evelyn from a genteel lady to the daughter of a traitor, fiercely shunned and ostracized by the ton. She bit her lip to suppress her rising sobs, her emerald green eyes flashing with an unyielding pride beneath the dim oil lamps flickering from the grand carriages rolling down the street. As Evelyn stood enduring the piercing chill of the downpour, the Thorne family's luxurious leather-trimmed carriage pulled up to the curb. Lord Edward Thorne, her paternal uncle, stepped down, accompanied by his haughty daughter Lydia, sheltered beneath a silk umbrella held aloft by a liveried footman. Edward's countenance betrayed a smug satisfaction and deep contempt upon beholding Evelyn, drenched in rain and standing utterly solitary in the street. He approached, striking his silver-topped cane sharply against the cobblestones, to draw the attention of the aristocrats departing from the nearby theater, raising his voice to deliberately humiliate her in public. "Oh, do look who is standing at the mercy of the elements on this filthy street corner," Edward proclaimed loudly with sheer triumph, his voice echoing across the wind-swept, rain-drenched corner. "Can this be the Honorable Miss Evelyn Thorne, the daughter of a treasonous turncoat who soiled the very honor of our peerage? You have been legally expelled from the Thorne family and left without a single penny. It would be best for you to sign the marriage settlement and bind yourself to Silas Mercer, that wealthy smuggler down at the docks, to compensate for the financial ruin your father wrought. Do not dare dream of ever standing in the same room as decent folk of the London season again." Lydia giggled mockingly behind her silk fan, her eyes sweeping disdainfully over Evelyn's damp gown. "Father is quite right. One whose Almack's vouchers have been revoked deserves only to keep company with the vermin of the commercial docks. Do stop clinging to that vain empty title of a noble lady." Evelyn remained standing tall, her countenance frighteningly composed, betraying not the slightest hint of embarrassment or fear. She stared directly into Edward's eyes with an emerald gaze as sharp as a blade, her voice ringing out resolute and clear, pronouncing every single word with absolute conviction. "Lord Edward," Evelyn spoke with exquisite poise, her voice crystal clear, yet possessing a commanding power that overbore even the sound of the falling rain. "Your schemes to slander my father and force me into signing a debtor's marriage settlement only prove one thing. You are in a state of sheer panic because you cannot decipher the true Far East sea chart that my father hid away. The actual usurpers and traitors are you, and the Crown's justice will soon bring this filthy stain to light. I shall never sign any contract that sells myself to Silas Mercer." Edward flushed red with fury, raising his cane high as though to shatter the chart casket in her hands to intimidate her. He roared, "You rebellious wretch. You dare oppose the Thorne family. You possess no Almack's vouchers, no dowry, and you are nothing but a filthy blemish upon the high society of the London season. I shall throw you into the brothels along the River Thames docks." Evelyn still stood tall, her chest heaving, but her eyes burned with an unyielding and resilient resolve. She clutched the oak casket tightly to her bosom, prepared to defend her father's final relics with her very life. Just then, a black carriage bearing the Admiralty's golden anchor and lion crest pulled to a halt before the establishment. A tall man stepped out of the vehicle, draped in a majestic navy cloak lined with deep blue velvet. It was none other than the Royal Navy's Admiral, Duke Arthur Vance, the man known as the most ruthless admiral in England, legendary for his illustrious victories and marked by a deep battle scar etched into his left cheek. His sudden appearance caused the entire street to hold its breath in stunned silence. Arthur walked forward unhurriedly, the steady tap of his oak walking cane against the wet stones sounding dry and decisive. Old Edward trembled as he bowed low in deferential respect. The storm continued to pour down upon Mayfair in sheets of water. The muddy streets, flooded with freezing rain, reflected the dim, hazy glow of the iron street lamps. Evelyn gazed at her family's old home in the distance, now sealed shut by the royal authorities. She recalled her childhood days spent sitting at her father's drafting table, inhaling the rich scent of Navy ink and listening to him recount tales of distant voyages to lands yet unnamed on any map. Her father had always told her, "Charts are not merely lines, Evelyn. They are the lives of thousands of sailors at sea. You must always draw with both precision and honor." The betrayal of Edward and Silas Mercer had demolished everything, twisting her father's grand legacy into a stain of treason. She clutched the oak casket closer to her heart, resolved to use her very life to prove her father's innocence. The freezing rain clung to Evelyn's skin amidst the shifting shadows. But the fire of pride burning within her heart could not be quenched. She watched the velvet-lined carriages roll past, carrying splendidly dressed aristocrats who laughed and conversed gaily, utterly indifferent to the suffering of a ruined lady. The small oak casket she held in her hands was the only proof linking her to her father's great legacy. Every meticulous line on the sea charts, every astronomical coordinate calculated for ocean navigation, had been executed by her father with a lifetime of devotion. Edward and Silas Mercer had conspired to plunder it all, but she vowed to use her own cartographic intellect to reclaim justice, restoring peace to the soul of her departed father resting at the bottom of the ocean. Arthur Vance stood in the rain, his tall silhouette radiating a chilling and majestic authority to the utmost degree. His ash-gray eyes swept over Lord Edward with a razor-like coldness, causing the greedy noble to recoil immediately, not daring to strike his silver-topped cane down upon Evelyn. Arthur uttered not a single word to Edward. Instead, he stepped closer to Evelyn, observing the worn wooden box in her hands and the cold raindrops tracing paths down her steadfast face. He felt a strange resonance. The proud fire blazing from her eyes was precisely what he sought to illuminate his stagnating naval observatory. He slowly extended his large, steady hand toward her, sheltering her from the biting raindrops. "Miss Thorne, how foolish it is for those who style themselves noble to cower before a mere map. Come with me. Your father's honor shall be vindicated by the Admiralty." Evelyn looked at the legendary scarred admiral, sensing the genuine respect hidden beneath his stony exterior. She did not hesitate to place her cold, trembling hand into his warm palm, turning her back on her cruel uncle as she stepped into the imposing black carriage. Chapter 2. The Admiral's Rescue. The fateful encounter in the storm-swept night quickly shifted to the Grand Work Hall of the Royal Navy Administration, where the light from massive chandeliers illuminated broad drafting tables covered in brass instruments and marine compasses. Duke Arthur Vance, the Admiral of the Royal Navy, stood examining a new Far East sea chart recently submitted by the Cartography Office. His countenance was as cold as carved stone, the battle scar on his left cheek twitching slightly under the lamplight. He was deeply dissatisfied with the proposed routes for the Royal Merchant Fleet about to set sail. Evelyn Thorne, whom Arthur admitted to enter the Grand Hall to take refuge from the storm, stood quietly nearby. Her emerald green eyes were immediately drawn to the gargantuan sea chart unfurled across the table. Unable to suppress the instincts of a genius cartographer, Evelyn took a large step forward, her voice clear and confident as she shattered the tense silence of the room. "Your Grace, if you permit your fleet to sail along this route, you are sending your sailors to a collective grave." The entire room erupted into an immediate clamor. The elderly cartographers of the Navy Board turned to look at her with expressions of wrath and disdain. A chief cartographer stepped forward, declaring angrily, "Whence comes this girl who dares insult 3 months of study by our cartography office?" This chart was drawn using the official parameters of the Admiralty. Evelyn remained completely unperturbed. She pointed her finger directly at the coordinates of 12 degrees north latitude and 104 degrees east longitude on the chart. "Official parameters, yes, but deliberately altered," Evelyn explained, her voice calm and filled with scientific reasoning. "Observe the depiction of the Strait of Malacca in this section. The draftsman has intentionally shifted the coordinates of the Great Reef 2 nautical miles westward, while simultaneously understating the warning depth by 3 fathoms. This creates the illusion of a deep and safe passage. Yet in truth, any heavily laden man of war navigating this area during spring tide would run aground upon the reef. These waters are a notorious haven for large smuggling vessels, which wait for precisely such an occurrence to attack and plunder the cargo." She picked up a slate pencil and a brass protractor from the table, swiftly redrawing the correct coordinate curve right next to the old line. The true passage must shift 2 nautical miles southeast, running along the deep water channel of Hainan Island. This is the very route my father measured firsthand before his death. Your old chart is no accidental error. It is a deliberate act of sabotage designed to lure your fleet into an ambush laid by smugglers. Arthur Vance narrowed his eyes as he examined the new lines and the swift mathematical calculations Evelyn had sketched on the margin of the chart. Having spent half his life at sea as a veteran admiral, he immediately recognized the absolute accuracy and scientific logic of her arguments. Evelyn's sharpness, courage, and genius talent struck him profoundly. Turning to the chief cartographer, he spoke in a low, commanding, and freezing voice. Cross-referenced the ship's logs of the previous voyage immediately. After 10 minutes of hurried cross-referencing, the chief cartographer trembled and fell to his knees, sweat pouring down his face. Your Grace, she is correct. The shoal coordinates are indeed shifted 2 nautical miles west. We utilized the template submitted by Lord Edward Thorne. Arthur Sterling let out a cold laugh, his sharp gray eyes turning to gaze at Evelyn. He recognized that this girl was not merely the daughter of Herbert Thorne. She was the true heir to that genius cartographical mind. Striking his oak cane firmly against the floor, he declared in an iron voice before all the gathered officers, "From this day forth, Evelyn Thorne shall be the exclusive cartographer, under the patronage of the Royal Navy of Sterling. Anyone who challenges her talent challenges the authority of the Admiral of the Fleet himself. I propose a professional contract to you, Miss Evelyn. You shall proceed to Vance Manor in Yorkshire to redesign the entirety of my military and commercial patrol charts. In return, I shall afford you the highest legal protection against the harassment of your family and the smugglers." Evelyn looked directly into the Admiral's cold gray eyes, sensing his absolute sincerity and profound respect for scientific truth. She curtsied slightly. "I accept your offer, Your Grace. I shall dedicate my intellect to your fleet." The Grand Hall of the Royal Navy Administration was steeped in the history of British seafaring. Hanging upon the stone walls were massive oil paintings depicting historic naval battles of the Royal Navy, while exquisite oak models of 3-decker men-of-war sat under glass cases, and bookshelves groaned under the weight of ancient marine logs. The air was perpetually scented with pine oil used for lubricating charts and the aroma of candlelight wax. Arthur Vance paced slowly around the vast drafting table, his fingers grazing the old roots. He had spent his youth on the decks of warships, braving tempests and enemies, and thus understood all too well the value of an accurate map. Evelyn's warning was no simple critique. It was a true salvation for his fleet, steering them away from lethal shoals. Arthur Vance listened in silence to Evelyn's every word, his eyes gleaming with pride for this courageous girl. He recognized that she had not only inherited Herbert Thorne's gift but also possessed a proud dignity that refused to bend to any social prejudices of the age. Using a brass rule, he aligned the new coordinates she had drawn, sensing the absolute dynamic balance on the strategic chart. "The cartographers of the Navy Board ought to feel thoroughly ashamed," Arthur spoke in a low, cold voice that echoed through the grand room. "A young lady has pointed out a coordinate error that you have spent 3 months investigating. From this moment onward, Miss Evelyn Thorne shall be the sole arbiter of my fleet's navigation." Arthur's decisive resolution completely silenced all opposition within the Navy Board. Evelyn felt an immense relief that at last, someone was willing to listen to and validate the scientific truth she and her father had pursued. She looked at him, the scarred admiral, arrogant, yet profoundly just silently vowing to employ all her talents to perfect the charts for his fleet, determined to prove worthy of the extraordinary trust he had placed in her on this stormy night. Chapter 3. The Seaside Manor of Yorkshire. The Admiralty carriage conveyed Evelyn Thorne to Vance Manor, a seaside estate standing tall atop the grey granite cliffs of Yorkshire, where the North Sea winds howled year-round. Unlike the stifling, extravagant townhouses of London, Vance Manor was a veritable naval fortress. The east wing of the manor had been converted into a massive cartography room, flooded with sunlight streaming through tall windows that looked out over the churning ocean. The room was arrayed with model warships, marine globes, reflecting telescopes, and thousands of sea charts neatly arranged on antique oak shelves. Free from the presence of a nagging stepmother or prying servants, Evelyn was surrounded only by young naval officers and professional draftsmen, all working under the disciplined direction of Admiral Arthur Vance. Evelyn quickly set to work redesigning the patrol routes for the fleet. As the exclusive cartographer, she had unrestricted access to the Admiralty archives preserved at the estate. In the course of sorting and cross-referencing the logbooks of the merchant vessels operating around the port of Yorkshire, Evelyn discovered highly anomalous coordinate discrepancies. Utilizing her genius cartographical analysis, she observed that several transport vessels belonging to the private fleet of her uncle, Lord Edward Thorne, routinely reported incorrect route coordinates during their North Sea voyages. The latitudes reported in the logs do not align at all with the actual oil consumption and provisions required, Evelyn murmured, using a brass compass to measure the distance on the nautical chart. She compared the logs of 3 different merchant vessels that had traveled the same route during the preceding month. Had they truly sailed along the official naval patrol route, their travel time ought to have been 48 hours shorter. This delay proves they deviated from the official passage to stop at a secret coordinate. She meticulously reconstructed the actual voyage, based on the fuel consumption and wind directions recorded in the captain's logs. The true coordinates led her directly to a secluded, desolate cove, hidden behind the sheer cliffs of the Yorkshire coast waders that were marked as dangerous and forbidden for anchorage on the official sea charts. Evelyn immediately realized this was a sophisticated smuggling port. Her own uncle, Lord Edward Thorne, had conspired with the smuggler Silas Mercer to transport contraband from France and evade the Crown's customs duties by utilizing falsified route coordinates. They had exploited the laxity in the Admiralty's cartographic supervision to conduct smuggling operations on a massive scale, right under the nose of the authorities. To establish ironclad proof, Evelyn used the Admiralty's specialized black ink to map the entire network of these illicit routes onto a private, secret chart. She clearly annotated the coordinate discrepancies and contrasted them with the falsified routes Edward had submitted. She sealed these documents in a brass box and hid it carefully. She knew this was the key to proving that her father had never committed treason. Rather, it was her uncle Edward who was the traitor, selling out the nation to conceal this ruthless smuggling ring. She would protect this dossier at all costs before exposing them before the Admiralty court. To facilitate her long-term cartographic work, Evelyn personally reorganized the document cases in the estate's grand library. She meticulously dusted the brass protractors, wiped clean the lenses of the refracting telescopes, and classified the routes by geographical regions, spanning from the Mediterranean to the North Sea. Every small tool, including parchment knives, quill pens, and waterproof ink, was arranged neatly on the large desk. When her fingers brushed against her father's old naval journals, a wave of nostalgia and fierce determination swelled in her chest. She knew that every line she drew from now on would not only guide Arthur's warships, but also serve as an instrument to reclaim justice for her family. Her solemnity and absolute dedication to science deeply inspired the young apprentice cartographers at the estate, prompting them to look upon her with utmost reverence. In the late afternoon, as the sea mist began to roll into the cartography room, Arthur Vance would often slip silently inside to inspect her progress. He did not disturb her when she was intensely focused. Instead, he stood at a distance, watching her slender form leaning over the drafting table, her golden hair catching the fading light of sunset. One evening, he personally brought her a warm cup of Earl Grey tea, placing it gently on the corner of the table. Such quiet tenderness from the notoriously cold admiral did not fail to astonish the officers on the estate, yet to Evelyn, it was a source of gentle warmth that eased her loneliness and fatigue after hours of taxing labor. One afternoon, Arthur invited her to take a walk along the sheer granite cliffs surrounding Vance Manor. The ocean waves roared, crashing against the reefs below, creating a wild and liberated atmosphere. Standing by the railing of the ancient seaside observatory, Arthur gestured slowly toward the distant lighthouses, sharing the history of the Sterling fleet. He listened as Evelyn passionately analyzed the coastal geological structures and how tidal currents influenced the drift speed of vessels. Her profound cartographic intellect and passion for scientific research were evident in her every word. "You understand the ocean not merely through figures, Evelyn," Arthur said, his voice deep and warm, his gaze softening as he looked at her in the ocean breeze. "You see its very soul and heartbeat." They conversed for hours near the cliff's edge, the initial barrier of social status seeming to vanish entirely. Evelyn felt thoroughly respected and understood, finding a steadfast pillar of strength in this man who bore so many wounds of his own. Their affection began to blossom like resilient heather clinging to the rocks quietly, yet with a stubborn endurance, preparing them for the day of reckoning in Mayfair. Chapter 4. The night of the sea storm and the rescue coordinates. A violent sea storm struck the Yorkshire cliffs on a late spring night. The tempestuous winds howled frantically outside Vance Manor, hurling colossal waves of white foam against the base of the castle's gray stone tower. Thunder crashed repeatedly across the pitch-black night sky. In the midst of the raging storm, a Royal Navy patrol vessel was stranded offshore, completely stripped of navigation due to the thick fog and blinding rain near the lethal Devil's Reef. Inside the castle's rescue command center, the Yorkshire lighthouse, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Duke Arthur Vance was utterly paralyzed by war-induced trauma, his memories of a long ago shipwreck resurfacing with terrifying intensity as he beheld the towering walls of water offshore. His hands gripped the iron railing tightly, his face was pale and he breathed heavily. Seeing Arthur lose his grip on reason and the officers panicking, unsure of how to direct the rescue boat amidst the dark, churning sea, Evelyn Thorne did not hesitate for a second. She stepped to the grand drafting table of the lighthouse, took a chart of the Yorkshire coast, rendered in water-resistant naval ink, and began calculating under the flickering light of the storm. Evelyn spoke in a clear, poised voice that overbore even the roaring tempest. "Officers, heed my words, the patrol vessel is stranded at 54 degrees north latitude. Under a force 9 northeasterly wind and with the current running at 4 knots, the ship's drift will be 1.5 nautical miles southwards every hour. We cannot dispatch the rescue boat directly east, for the waves will hurl it straight into the cliffs." She used a pencil to quickly draw a curve adjusting for the drift coordinates on the chart. The rescue boat must launch from the southern cove of the harbor, charting a course 45 degrees southeast to exploit the water's propulsion, rounding Devil's Reef from behind to approach the stern of the patrol vessel. Signal the lighthouse lamp in a cycle of 3 long flashes and 1 short flash to guide the vessel to steer its helm to match this exact angle. The naval officer stared at her complex mathematical calculations and precise lines with absolute admiration. They immediately executed the commands. The rescue boat launched and signaled with lights in accordance with her exact instructions. After an hour of extreme, nerve-wracking tension, the horn signaling a successful rescue echoed from the harbor. The entire crew of the stranded patrol vessel was safely rescued, without a single loss of life. In the windswept lighthouse room, Arthur gradually regained consciousness, his panic dissipating as he beheld Evelyn standing steadfast beside the drafting table under the storm lantern's glow. He realized this young woman was not merely a genius cartographer. She was the lighthouse saving his soul from the shadows of his past. Arthur walked slowly toward her, his large fingers gently touching her shoulder. "You have saved my fleet." "And you have saved me as well, Evelyn," Arthur said, his low voice thick with intense emotion. Evelyn looked up at him, her emerald green eyes flashing with resilience. "Your Grace, storms at sea may be terrifying, but scientific coordinates remain an absolute truth to guide us. You no longer have to face the ocean alone." Arthur stared deep into her eyes, unable to restrain the affection burning in his chest. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a deep, ardent, and passionate intensity amidst the howling wind and the waves crashing against the stone tower's base. That kiss officially shattered the cold distance that had initially separated them, binding their 2 proud souls into an unbreakable alliance of love on that dark Yorkshire night. The storm continued to howl and lash against the thick glass panes of the lighthouse tower, but inside the control room, the world seemed to have stilled completely. Arthur held Evelyn close in his embrace, feeling the warmth of her body radiating through her damp, cold clothes. His heart, which had been frozen by fear of the sea and remorse following his family's shipwreck, now found its steady, powerful beat once more. Looking deep into her sparkling green eyes, which reflected the storm lantern's light, he spoke in a low, sincere rasp. "Evelyn, you are the only one who can force the sea to submit to your equations, and you are the only one who can dispel the darkness from my mind." Evelyn smiled softly, leaning her head gently against his shoulder, listening to his strong heartbeat like a secure anchor, keeping her steady against all the tempests of life. Before beginning her calculations, Evelyn had noticed Arthur's panicked state. His gray eyes had lost focus, and his chest muscles were contracting sharply, rendering his breathing erratic. She did not merely focus on the map. She took hold of his freezing hands, leaning close to whisper reassuringly into his ear. "Arthur, look at me. You are in a lighthouse on land, not on that shipwreck of the past. Focus on the bells and this light." Her gentle, steadying words acted as a balm to his frayed nerves, anchoring him back to reality. The successful rescue of the fleet not only solidified Evelyn's peerless position, but also bound their 2 souls tightly together, transcending the boundaries of formal acquaintance and laying a solid foundation for a genuine, profoundly deep love. The ocean roared against the base of the stone tower, sounding like the growl of a colossal sea monster attempting to swallow the castle whole. Evelyn stood on the highest observation platform, the salty sea spray clinging to her hair and cloak. Once the giant lighthouse lamp was lit with purified whale oil, its brilliant beam swept across the raging waters, illuminating the silhouette of the patrol vessel tossing violently amidst the reefs. Naval officers continuously shouted reports of latitude and wind speed. Evelyn quickly adjusted the large telescope to observe the mast of the distressed vessel. Her absolute focus and deft hands, as she computed the drift angles, offered the sole glimmer of hope in this storm. Arthur stood beside her, watching her resilient posture. His heart swelled with admiration and deep love, knowing that this girl was the destiny of his life. Chapter 5: The Royal Navy Alliance. The next morning, in the warm study of Vance Manor, sunlight filtered through the grand glass windows, dispelling the chill of the storm. Arthur Sterling sat behind a large mahogany desk, his countenance having regained the healthy color and commanding dignity of a supreme admiral. Evelyn sat opposite him, dressed in a simple navy blue gown that exuded elegance and resilience. Arthur slid a document bearing the red wax seal of the Admiralty toward her, speaking in a grave tone. "Evelyn," Arthur said, his voice deep, warm, and clear. "The Admiralty has just issued a secret investigative summons to seize all of your father's charts in London, and they may well issue a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of complicity in treason. Edward's slander is dangerous. He has conservative factions in Parliament supporting him. To shield you from interrogation by the naval gendarmerie, I propose a contract marriage alliance between us. By becoming the Duchess of Stirling, you will receive the highest legal immunity afforded to the peerage. The naval gendarmerie will have no authority to search your private chambers or arrest you without the direct signature of the Prince Regent himself." He paused for a brief moment, his gray eyes searching hers. "This is a mutual protection alliance. I shall serve as your legal and military bulwark, granting you complete control over the port of Yorkshire so that you may map freely. But I wish you to know that my feelings for you, since last night, are no longer a mere professional agreement. I desire to protect you because you are the only woman who has made my heart beat once more." Evelyn offered a proud, sharp smile, her face lighting up in the morning sun. She gave a slight nod in response. "Arthur, I accept your proposal. Not merely for the legal immunity, but because I trust you and we make perfect partners. We shall face Edward together in London." Immediately afterward, Evelyn opened the brass box and placed it on the desk before Arthur. She explained with composure, "And here is the actual evidence. By cross-referencing the ship's logs of the merchant fleet at the port of Yorkshire, I discovered that my uncle, Edward Thorne, has conspired with the smuggler Silas Mercer to evade customs duties and transport contraband from France by altering the charts with falsified coordinates. My father discovered this prior to his death, which is why Edward had to devise the plot to accuse my father of treason in order to silence him." Arthur Sterling struck furious, the scar on his left cheek twitching with rage. "Treasonous scoundrels! I shall order the Yorkshire fleet to blockade Edward's entire merchant fleet immediately to investigate their unlawful activities." "No, Arthur, please remain calm," Evelyn said, quickly placing her hand over his to soothe his anger. "If you arrest them now, Edward will immediately realize his plot has been exposed, and he will destroy the smuggling transaction ledgers in London. We must turn their own scheme against them. Let his vessels proceed, but we shall covertly alter the Navy's patrol routes to monitor them from afar. When we return to London for the Royal Navy Ball tonight, we shall lure them into their peak of confidence, and then expose Edward's entire criminality at the Admiralty's decisive hearing." Arthur looked at Evelyn, admiring her sharp wit and composure. He gently took her hand, lifting it to his lips for a soft kiss. "Your suggestion is marvelous. Evelyn, I shall defer to the plan of my Admiral's lady. We shall allow that traitor to dig his own grave." They quickly prepared the coordinate files and chart drafts to ready themselves for their crucial return to the London season, prepared to confront the social storm awaiting them in the capital. The marriage contract was drafted with absolute precision, under the supervision of Solicitor Jenkins. The agreement explicitly stated that Evelyn would retain sole ownership of all her cartographic drafts, strategic charts, and the entirety of her inheritance from her father, entirely free from coverture under the common law of England. Arthur wished to ensure that she remained completely independent financially and held a legal standing equal to his own before the Royal Cartographical Society. He signed his name to the marriage settlement with a decisive, proud stroke of his quill, This is your shield, Evelyn. From this day forward, no one in London shall have the right to touch your property or your honor." Solicitor Jenkins adjusted his thick spectacles, his hands trembling slightly as he looked upon the signed marriage settlement, which bore the red wax seal of Duke Arthur. This extraordinary contract served as the ultimate legal safeguard, protecting Evelyn from any Admiralty summons, while securing her absolute ownership of all inventions and charts she drew herself. Arthur desired that she be entirely free and financially independent, holding a legal status equal to that of a lawful duchess before high society. Evelyn looked at Arthur with eyes full of deep appreciation and gratitude, realizing he had prepared everything meticulously to protect her from the impending storms in London. Jenkins smiled faintly as he observed Arthur's attentive care for Evelyn. Having served the House of Stirling for 3 decades, he had never seen the cold admiral care for anyone in such a manner. He understood that this marriage settlement was not merely a legal alliance, but the deepest commitment of love from Arthur to this brilliant girl. Evelyn signed her name beside Arthur's, feeling a wave of warmth spread through her chest. She knew she had found the peaceful haven of her life. The study was now filled with the delicate scent of lavender drifting in from the garden alongside the morning Yorkshire mist. The marriage settlement lay in state in the center of the desk, its dark red wax seals glistening in the bright sunlight. Arthur gently rubbed Evelyn's hand, her slender fingers tracing the signatures, sensing the immense legal weight and deep affection the Admiral had prepared. Both understood that this was no dry professional alliance, but the destined binding of their lives, as they prepared to venture together toward Mayfair, to confront the social tempests awaiting them. This warm room stood as a silent witness to a true love quietly blossoming. Chapter 6. The Storm of the Naval Ball. The return to London of Admiral Arthur Stirling, with his newlywed bride Evelyn Thorne, sent shockwaves through the elite aristocratic circles of Mayfair. At the Grand Royal Navy Ball hosted at the Admiralty House in London, hundreds of curious and malicious gazes converged upon the couple. Evelyn appeared magnificent in a noble ocean blue satin evening gown, her poised demeanor and intellectual beauty instantly silencing the initial rumors. Arthur walked at her side, his countenance cold and imposing, his arm resting gently around her waist, as an open declaration of absolute protection before the entirety of high society. Her paternal uncle Lord Edward Thorne, accompanied by the smuggler Silas Mercer, stood amidst the crowd of conservative officers, their faces darkening with envy as they saw Evelyn appear splendidly as a duchess. Edward decided to approach, seeking a way to humiliate her before the assembled guests. "Oh, do look who is playing the grand noble lady here," Edward remarked in a loud, sarcastic tone, deliberately drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Miss Evelyn Thorne, the daughter of the traitor Herbert Thorne, now using her charms to hoodwink a Navy admiral. A creature stripped of Almack's vouchers, whose father sold charts to French spies, does not deserve to stand here and offend the eyes of our military men. Silas Mercer, standing beside him, sneered in agreement. Indeed, our polite society ought not to be deceived by this glittering exterior. Whispers of suspicion began to ripple through the surrounding scholars and ladies. Naval officers scrutinized Evelyn with stern, probing looks. Faced with this public insult, Evelyn did not retreat behind Arthur. She took a long stride forward, standing tall before Edward, her green eyes flashing with unyielding pride. She spoke in a clear, poised, and razor-sharp voice. "Lord Edward," Evelyn spoke out clearly, her voice echoing throughout the ballroom. "You style yourself the head of the Thorne cartographic lineage and claim your patrol charts are the gold standard of the Admiralty. Right here, then, before these veteran officers and the Council of the Royal Geographical Society, explain the mathematical formula for calculating longitude deviation, using the lunar distance method to position a warship at sea when crossing the equator. This is the most fundamental calculation for any true cartographer. If you cannot answer, then it is you who are the impostor, defiling the honor of our seafaring nation." Edward Thorne was rendered utterly speechless, his face turning from red to a pale white under the watchful eyes of the crowd. He stammered, beads of sweat rolling down his cheek. Those are complex academic matters, not fit for discussion at such a social gathering." Evelyn let out a cold, contemptuous chuckle. "It is not because of complexity, but because you are entirely ignorant. How can a man who does not know the difference between magnetic deviation and longitude error draft patrol charts for the fleet, unless he stole my father's designs or fabricated the data?" Mocking laughter began to ripple from the veteran naval officers, nearby directed at Edward. They whispered among themselves, gossiping about the incompetence of the titled fraud. Just then, Arthur Sterling smiled with pride, stepping up beside Evelyn. He drew forth a shimmering diamond anchor brooch, the heirloom of the Sterling family, and gently pinned it to her bodice, to the astonishment of the entire ballroom. Staring coldly at Edward, he spoke in a deep, warm, and iron-hard voice that resonated across the room. "This is the Sterling anchor brooch reserved solely for my lawful Duchess. Any insult directed at her is an affront to the House of Sterling. I shall employ every legal authority and the honor of an admiral to haul such an offender before the House of Lords. For now you two are not worthy of standing in the same room as my wife." Edward Thorne and Silas Mercer bowed their heads in humiliation, slinking quickly into the shadows amidst the absolute disdain of the gathered guests. Arthur clasped Evelyn's hand firmly, leading her to the center of the floor as the strains of a waltz began to rise. They spun together in a triumphal dance, asserting Evelyn's position as a proud duchess and her brilliant talent before the entire high society of the London season. The spiritual bond between them grew even stronger after this first trial. The ballroom was filled with the soaring, sweet melodies of violins, while grand crystal chandeliers reflected splendid light onto the ocean blue skirt of Evelyn's gown. Every turn, every step of her dance aligned in perfect harmony with Arthur, like the interlocking mechanical gears of the most precise compass. Leaning down, he whispered tenderly into her ear, "You have just executed an extraordinary navigation, my lady. Those fools are utterly powerless against your intellect." Evelyn looked up at him, her green eyes shining with happiness and pride. Arthur's absolute support gave her complete confidence, transforming the waltz into an emotional triumph in the heart of the conservative London season. Evelyn's appearance and triumph at the Royal Navy Ball completely altered the landscape of this year's London season. The gossip rags and polite society that had once slandered her now turned to praise the brilliant cartographic talent of the Admiral's lady. Those who had once looked down upon her now sought by any means to secure a dance with her, or to receive a hand-drawn souvenir map. Evelyn felt a profound pride upon seeing her father's name once again mentioned with high regard in the social conversations of the elite. Arthur Sterling held her hand tightly, smiling as he guided her through the resounding applause of the entire hall. Meanwhile, Silas Mercer clenched his fists inside his expensive leather gloves. This failed slander cost him all credibility with major investors of the London season. Edward Thorne breathed heavily in deep humiliation, knowing that his attempt to defame Evelyn had backfired entirely. Around them, the guests continued to gossip animatedly about the extraordinary character of the Duchess of Sterling. Arthur Sterling cast an affectionate and proud look at Evelyn, taking her hand to lead her down the stone steps of the hall, leaving the defeated villains behind to sink slowly into the darkness. Chapter 7. The Trap of the Forged Sea Chart. The day of the official Admiralty hearing to decide the Thorne family treason case was drawing near. Lord Edward Thorne fell into a state of sheer panic upon seeing Arthur Sterling wield his full admiral authority to shield Evelyn. He decided to execute a malicious plot to destroy her permanently. Edward covertly stole a draft copy of the Royal Navy Fleet Patrol Chart for the English Channel from her father's old workshop. Subsequently, he used a specialized sympathetic ink to draw over the genuine patrol coordinates, creating falsified guidance lines that would lead the fleet straight into danger, while forging evidence that Evelyn was selling confidential military information to French spies. Edward ordered his henchmen to secretly plant this forged chart in the drawer of Evelyn's writing desk at the Duke of Sterling's London townhouse, and then tipped off the Admiralty Gendarmerie to catch her red-handed in the act of treason. On the night before the raid, Evelyn entered her study to inspect her documents. When she opened her drawer to retrieve a protractor, she discovered a draft chart lying conspicuously on top, which was not where she kept her files. She pulled the chart out to examine it under the candlelight. Armed with the deep knowledge of mapping inks handed down by her father, Evelyn detected highly suspicious signs. The black ink on the newly drawn patrol coordinates had a dull reflectivity, and a faint chemical odor rose when she brought it close to her nose. The unmistakable scent of iron oxide mixed with dilute sulfuric acid, the primary components of secret sympathetic ink commonly utilized in military espionage. Evelyn narrowed her eyes to observe the document under a handheld microscope. She noticed that the lines drawn over the original map bore tiny scratches left by a coarse iron nib, completely unlike her own soft quill strokes. She lit the spirit lamp on her desk, gently warming the chart above the flame at a safe distance. Under the influence of heat, the chemical reaction occurred immediately. The black sympathetic ink began to change color, turning into a light reddish-brown and leaving gray crystals bonded to the paper, clearly exposing the original blue lines hidden beneath. More importantly, at the bottom corner of the map, her Uncle Edward Thorne's secret wax seal, which had been impressed using pine resin, also became clearly visible under the warmth and ironclad signature, proving precisely who the true author of this forged map was. "Edward Thorne," Evelyn murmured, her face turning ice-cold with fury at her uncle's malicious plot. "He wishes to use my life and the honor of the entire fleet to hide his smuggling crimes. He has crossed the line." She immediately extinguished the spirit lamp, carefully placing the forged chart into a private sealed iron box to serve as evidence before the court. At the same time, she swiftly reassembled her dossier to prepare for the confrontation. When the naval gendarmerie raided the townhouse the next morning, following Edward's tip, they found no incriminating treasonous documents, as everything was already under the complete control of Evelyn and Arthur. Arthur stood guard before her study door, forbidding the officers from entering her private chambers by virtue of the Duchess of Stirling's legal immunity. They waited patiently for the morrow to execute their decisive counterstroke before the Admiralty Court. Evelyn spent the entire night perfecting the scientific comparison between the forged chart and the actual coordinates from Edward's smuggling logs. She wrote a detailed 10-page report, clearly explaining the chemical logic of sympathetic ink and how it reacted under heat, transforming the fabricated evidence into a perfect trap that recoiled upon the mastermind. Her composure and faith in science gave her the strength to overcome her fear. She looked out the window as the London dawn broke, her heart resolved to demand justice for her late father, and to vindicate her own drafting skills before the entire board of the Admiralty of Great Britain. While preparing the documents, Evelyn flipped open her father's old research notebook, her fingers gently tracing the familiar, beloved handwriting. Childhood memories rushed back, bringing with them a sharp pain at the cruelty of Edward. He had not only stolen their property and honor, but was also willing to ruin her entire life with his filthy schemes. Yet now she was no longer a helpless child. At her side stood Arthur Stirling, the brave admiral who loved her with all his heart. She gathered old stamp wax fragments, scrap papers, and arranged them neatly inside the sealed iron chest, ready for tomorrow's life-or-death trial. Evelyn carefully lifted the sea chart with tweezers and examined it closely under candlelight angled at 45 degrees to observe the parchment fibers. She discovered that the paper fibers in the altered coordinate region had been compressed and slightly scratched by a harsh iron nib, completely different from the soft natural parchment surrounding it. Using the microscope, she inspected the fiber structure and discovered crystals of dilute sulfuric acid clinging tightly to the grain, proving an intentional defiling hand. The preparation of chemical evidence demanded absolute caution, as a single excess drop of chemicals could scorch the antique parchment and destroy all proof. Evelyn concentrated intensely, using a dropper to measure precise amounts of potassium ferrocyanide, her heart filled with indignation at the base conspiracy, yet absolute in her trust in the integrity of science. As she watched the blue flame of the spirit lamp reveal the hidden ink marks, Evelyn understood that her caution and scientific knowledge had saved her life once more. She recalled her father's counsel when teaching her about sympathetic inks. "Hidden writing can only be exposed by an honest source of heat, Evelyn. Falsehoods are the same. They will reveal themselves when met with the light of justice." Her determination and fierce trust in science helped her overcome her initial fear, standing firm against her uncle's dark traps. She gently rolled up the forged map, silently promising to expose his entire crime before the full board of the Admiralty tomorrow. Chapter 8. The Ironclad Alliance of Edison. To consolidate their evidence prior to the decisive Admiralty hearing, Arthur Stirling and Evelyn Thorne conducted a covert investigation that very day. They traveled in an unmarked carriage to an ancient military stationery supplier tucked away deep in Mayfair, the sole establishment in London authorized by the Admiralty to manufacture and supply the specialized sympathetic ink used for military espionage. Cowed by the overwhelming authority of the Admiral Duke, the shopkeeper tremblingly produced the shop's transaction ledgers. Evelyn swiftly flipped through the pages, recording chemical sales over the past month. Her sharp eyes immediately halted at an entry dated May 14. A large quantity of sympathetic ink and dilute sulfuric acid had been purchased by a servant wearing the livery of the Thorne family. Although the buyer had signed a false name, The shop's receipt book still bore the impression of Lord Edward Thorne's personal brass signet ring, used to clear the bank draft. We now possess the financial evidence directly linking Edward to this exclusive ink, Evelyn declared confidently, pointing to the wax stamp residue on the ledger page. The stationer agreed to sign a legal affidavit testifying to this transaction under the protection of Duke Arthur's authority. They quickly returned to Arthur's London townhouse. Upon their arrival, they found a highly tense situation. A squad of Admiralty gendarmerie, led by conservative officers, was surrounding the grand hall of the townhouse, demanding to execute a search warrant on Evelyn's study following Edward's tip. Arthur Sterling stood directly blocking the stone staircase leading to her chambers, his towering stature and naval cloak forming an impenetrable wall of steel. "Step aside, Your Grace," the officer leading the gendarmerie barked, holding up the search warrant. "We have orders to investigate Evelyn Thorne for high treason. Not a single soul shall ascend the staircase without a search warrant signed directly by the hand of the Prince Regent himself." Arthur spoke in a deep, cold voice that echoed through the grand hall, his hand resting on the golden hilt of his sword. "Any unlawful intrusion into the Sterling estate shall be prosecuted before the House of Lords. Evelyn Thorne is now the lawful Duchess of Sterling, and her honor is protected by the supreme privileges of the Sterling lineage and the royal charters. Anyone who dares cross this threshold shall face the judgment of the High Court of the Admiralty." The absolute resolve and immense political influence of the Admiral Duke struck fear into the gendarmerie. Not a single man dared take a step forward. They were forced to lower their weapons and retreat to seek official royal authorization. Arthur ascended to the room and opened the door. Evelyn stood by the drafting table, gazing at him with eyes brimming with gratitude and deep admiration. Arthur approached, drawing her tightly into his embrace and placing a tender kiss upon her brow. "Do not fear, Evelyn," Arthur whispered against her ear. "Even if I must confront the entire Admiralty with all my legal power and honor, I shall protect you to the end. You are my lady, the sole lighthouse of my life." Evelyn clutched his cloak, offering a resilient smile. "I am not afraid, Arthur. I am fully prepared for tomorrow. We shall reclaim all that belongs to us." In the chamber flooded with the warm glow of the London sunset, they worked together to arrange the financial documents and the heat-treated forged chart. Evelyn meticulously verified every detail, ensuring the logic of the cross-referenced coordinates was flawless. Arthur stood beside her, watching the captivating concentration of this intellectual lady. Evelyn's resilience not only strengthened his belief in justice, but also blossomed into a love more profound and enduring than ever before, linking two solitary souls amidst the bustling London season. The cartography room of the London townhouse was ablaze with candlelight tonight. Evelyn bent over the chart, carefully measuring every millimeter of latitude with brass calipers. She explained to Arthur the mechanism of the chemical potassium ferrocyanide. When this substance interacted with the iron ions in the heated sympathetic ink, it would yield a stable, indelible precipitate of Prussian blue, directly rendering the original lines visible. Arthur watched her skilled hands, his heart swelling with immense pride. He took a warm cloth and gently wiped away a smudge of black ink from her cheek, speaking in a low, warm voice. "Tomorrow, before the prince and the entire council, you shall show them the true intellect of a cartographer. I shall stand at your side, your strongest shield." Evelyn rested her head against his chest, finding complete peace in the midst of the storm preceding the fateful day of judgment. The unmarked carriage rolled slowly through the streets of Mayfair under the cold, drizzling rain of London. Inside the carriage, the space was quiet and warm, scented with leather and candle wax. Arthur gently took Evelyn's hand, imparting a steadying warmth to her. They spoke of the plans for tomorrow's court. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the strong, steady beat of Arthur's heart. She shared stories of the years spent working in solitude within her father's old workshop, constantly dismissed and rejected simply because she was a woman. Arthur listened with profound empathy, vowing to use his honor and station to demand justice for her family. This spiritual resonance between them deepened, transforming the initial marriage alliance into a tightly bound love. The London townhouse of the Duke of Sterling was exceptionally quiet tonight after the gendarmerie withdrew. Evelyn sat silently at her desk, the moonlight filtering through the window and casting a thin silver sheen over her hair and shoulders. Arthur Sterling entered the room, carrying a warm woolen cloak, which he gently draped over her shoulders. Leaning down, he embraced her softly from behind, speaking in a low, gentle, and warm voice. "You have labored so hard, Evelyn." Tomorrow all storms shall cease, and I shall take you back to Yorkshire, to the blue sea and our peaceful roots." Evelyn placed her hand over his, smiling happily, feeling complete peace and ready to face the fateful day of judgment. Chapter 9. The Admiralty Board Hearing. The dramatic Admiralty hearing took place at the Admiralty Court in London, under the direct presidency of the Prince Regent and the Board of High Admirals of Great Britain. The vast chamber was flooded with light from tall glass windows overlooking the River Thames, enveloped in an atmosphere of solemnity and extreme tension. Lord Edward Thorne and the smuggler Silas Mercer stood in the witness box, their countenances wearing expressions of smug confidence, convinced that Evelyn would be sent to the gallows for high treason this day. Edward stepped forward to the questioning podium, presenting the forged chart bearing the secret seal of the Admiralty. "Your Highness and esteemed admirals, here is the secret chart, recording the patrol coordinates of the Royal Fleet discovered in Evelyn Thorne's quarters. She has drawn falsified coordinates over the original map to lure our fleet into dangerous waters, selling patrol information to enemy spies for illicit gain. This despicable act of treason continues the crimes of her father before her, and merits punishment upon the gallows." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Several of the senior admirals nodded in agreement, demanding immediate sentencing. Evelyn Thorne stepped forward to the witness stand, her face calmly composed. She was dressed in her noble ocean blue satin gown, the sterling anchor brooch shimmering on her bodice. Looking directly into the eyes of Edward and Silas, she spoke in a clear, poised voice. "Your Highness and my lords, the honor of the Thorne name is not something to be trampled upon by the actual smugglers and traitors. The chart that Edward Thorne has just presented is in truth a vulgar forgery designed to frame me and conceal his own smuggling ring." She placed the forged chart on the demonstration table in the center of the courtroom, lit the spirit lamp, and prepared a dilute solution of potassium ferrocyanide. Under the bated breath of the entire Board of Admirals, Evelyn dropped a few drops of the solution onto the patrol coordinates and gently warmed the chart over the spirit lamp. The chemical reaction took place instantly under the influence of heat and the solution. The black sympathetic ink of the falsified patrol lines immediately changed to a pale reddish-brown and gradually faded away entirely, clearly exposing the original blue lines hidden beneath. Simultaneously, at the bottom corner of the chart, Edward Thorne's personal brass signet, which had been pressed into the paper using pine oil, showed up brilliantly under the heat. This black ink of the falsified coordinates was drawn using specialized sympathetic ink. Evelyn spoke out, her resolute voice echoing through the courtroom. "It was purchased by Edward Thorne from the Mayfair stationery shop on May 14 to execute this forgery. And here is the sworn affidavit from the stationer, testifying to the transaction cleared, with Edward's own signet ring." Arthur Sterling stepped forward, presenting the stationer's affidavit and the ship logs cross-referencing the coordinates of Edward's fleet. "My lords, the false coordinates drawn on this chart do not lead to French waters. If you recalculate the eccentric angle of the route, these forged coordinates guide the patrol fleet away from a secluded, desolate cove in Yorkshire, which is the secret smuggling port of Silas Mercer. Edward drew this false map to divert the fleet, enabling Silas Mercer's smuggling vessels to freely transport contraband and evade crown duties in England." The Prince Regent took hold of the affidavit and the heat-tested chart, his face burning with fury at this blatant act of treason that had nearly destroyed the Royal Patrol Fleet. What a despicable and utterly ruthless deed. "Edward Thorne, you have not only betrayed the Royal Fleet but also plotted the ruin of your own niece and committed high treason. Gendarmerie, throw Edward Thorne and Silas Mercer into the dungeons immediately to await their day on the gallows." Edward Thorne and Silas Mercer cried out miserably, their faces gray and drained of blood, as the gendarmerie pinned them and dragged them away, amidst the outraged jeers of the entire court. Arthur Sterling walked over to Evelyn, holding her hand firmly, and declared with pride before the entire court, "Her honor is indissolubly bound to the honor of the House of Sterling. Anyone who dares defame her shall face the full legal weight and the most severe retribution of the Admiralty and the House of Lords. Evelyn Thorne is my sole lawful duchess, the genius cartographer who saved the nation's patrol fleet." Resounding applause echoed throughout the Admiralty Court, marking the complete restoration of the Thorne family's honor and a resounding victory for justice. Evelyn looked at Arthur, her eyes rimmed with red but brimming with happiness, knowing that her long days of lonely grievance had ended gloriously under the light of maritime justice and his sincere love. The vindication of the Thorne name, was not merely a victory of honor, but the most brilliant scientific validation of Herbert Thorne's lifetime of devotion. The entire assembly of scholars and naval officers bowed in admiration before Evelyn's outstanding intellect and character. The Prince Regent nodded with warm approval, declaring the lifting of the seal on the Mayfair cartography workshop and all of Herbert Thorne's maritime patents, restoring full legal ownership to the proud daughter of the Thorne family. This was a proud new chapter, ending dark days and casting a radiant light upon the great Thorne name. The senior officers and admirals of the Navy Board huddled together to examine the heat-tested chart. The transformation of colors from the false black ink to the Prussian blue, shimmering under the sunlight reflected from the River Thames, convinced them completely of the authenticity of this scientific test. As men who had spent their lives at sea, they understood that these false coordinates, had they gone undetected, would have run the entire fleet aground and resulted in a massive military disaster. Murmurs of admiration swept the courtroom toward Evelyn. The Prince Regent struck his gavel, declaring the complete restoration of Herbert Thorne's honor and recognizing Evelyn's talent before the entire academic maritime establishment of Great Britain. Chapter 10. The peaceful voyage a warm spring returned to the wild seaside of Yorkshire. Carpets of bluebells and heather began to bloom along the grey cliffs of Vance Manor, making way for brilliant sunshine that illuminated the study chambers of the estate. Vance Manor had now undergone a complete transformation. Gone was the gloomy, tense atmosphere of the past stormy days. The harbor was filled with the laughter and chatter of officers and servants, and the rhythmic, steady ticking of a busy seaside life. The honor of the Thorne family was completely restored. The Prince Regent's decree cleared all charges of treason against Evelyn's late father, the cartographer Herbert Thorne. The grand commercial port and the entirety of her family's merchant fleet in London, which had been usurped by Edward Thorne, were now legally returned to her sole ownership and control. In the grand hall of the castle, Evelyn stood beside Arthur, dressed in her noble ocean blue satin gown, her chest adorned with the shimmering gold compass medal of the Admiralty, personally bestowed by the Prince Regent. This was the highest honor awarded for her strategic cartographic contributions to the royal fleet. The entire assembly of officers and estate servants looked upon her with eyes full of deep respect and admiration. She was no longer an orphaned girl cast out onto the street corners of the London season, but had become the true Duchess of the Sterling lineage, the one who held the peaceful navigation charts for the entire fleet. That night, the Yorkshire sky was high and filled with stars hanging like diamond dust against a velvet black canopy. The silver moonlight reflected onto the calm waves of the North Sea rolling below the cliffs. Arthur led Evelyn out to the grand balcony of the castle's seaside observatory. A gentle sea breeze blew, carrying the warm, salty scent of spring. Arthur no longer bore his cold, withdrawn demeanor of the past. His face reflected complete peace and happiness. He gently took Evelyn's hand, drawing her close, and placed a small velvet box into her palm. "Evelyn," Arthur spoke in a deep, tender, and gentle voice. "When I took you in from the rainy night in London, I sought only a skilled cartographer to adjust the routes of my fleet and prevent further wartime losses. Yet you have given me so much more. You have used science and courage to save my fleet in the storm, used your love to dispel the darkness of my shipwreck trauma, and healed my wounded soul. Now there are no longer any contract terms between us. I stand before you simply as a man who loves you deeply with all his heart." He opened the velvet box, revealing an exquisitely handcrafted ring of pure gold, its face depicting an anchor mechanism holding a large, sparkling emerald, surrounded by the engraved longitude and latitude coordinates of the Yorkshire lighthouse, where they had shared their first kiss in the storm. Arthur sank to one knee on the balcony grass under the silver moon, his grey eyes looking deep into hers. "Consent to marry me for love, to become the true Duchess of my life. We shall share every voyage of this life together until our very last moments." Happy tears glistened like morning dew as they fell down Evelyn's cheeks. She felt the strong, warm pulse of Arthur's heart beating steadily beneath her fingers. She nodded gently, whispering with overflowing love, "I consent, Arthur. I shall remain at your side forever, steering the ship of Sterling with you along every peaceful voyage ahead." Arthur rose, slipping the emerald-set anchor ring onto her finger and drawing her close by the waist, sealing their vow with a deep, passionate kiss beneath the twinkling Yorkshire starlight. The rustle of the waves at the base of the cliffs sounded like an eternal love song, marking the moment their true love was brilliantly revealed. Hand in hand, they looked out over the vast ocean, ready to embrace the peaceful years and a lifetime of happiness ahead as lifelong partners in both science and love. Spring brought warm sunshine to the windswept seaside estate in Yorkshire. Evelyn Thorne stood beside Arthur on the balcony of the Marine Observatory, the gold compass medal shining upon her bodice. The Dowager Duchess of Stirling had presented Evelyn with the family's heirloom emerald tiara, recognizing her as the sole lawful duchess of the family. Beneath the starlit night sky reflected in the calm waters of the North Sea, Arthur slipped the emerald anchor ring onto her finger, looking out at the boundless ocean beside her as they embarked on a lifetime of happiness and peace. As she gazed at the emerald-set anchor ring sparkling on her finger, Evelyn was overcome with boundless joy. The ring was not merely a symbol of love, but ironclad proof of a journey that had weathered storms, social tempests, and betrayal to affirm her true worth. Together they had steered their ship past all the perilous reefs of the North Sea to anchor in the peaceful harbor of true love. Arthur embraced her closely from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, as they both looked out over the vast ocean shimmering under the silver moonlight, prepared for the happy and peaceful voyages that lay ahead. That evening, the celebratory feast at the castle was exceedingly warm and intimate. The Dowager Duchess of Stirling embraced Evelyn affectionately, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "Welcome to this family, Evelyn. You are the only one who has brought light and peace back into my son's life." The servants and naval officers cheered in celebration, their voices echoing through the castle. Evelyn leaned her shoulder against Arthur's, feeling a complete sense of tranquility flowing through her veins. Her life's vessel had finally found its peaceful harbor, and the lighthouse that would guide it forever. In London, the Thorne family's old cartography workshop in Mayfair was reopened under Evelyn's direction. A brass plaque proudly bearing the name Thorne and Daughter was hung high in the heart of the city. Her father's faithful former apprentices wept with joy when she recalled them to service. Evelyn stood in the center of the familiar room of her childhood, touching the chart printing press and the ancient ink trays, her heart overflowing with gratitude for Arthur Stirling, the man who had deployed his entire fleet and title to reclaim this legacy for her. Their tempest-tested romance had borne sweet fruit, opening a passage to a completely peaceful voyage.